Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Margaret, and as the Provost Chancellor for Culture and Wellbeing of the University of Tasmania, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's International Women's Day address. And it's wonderful to see such a rich audience coming along to this event. As a reflection of this institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of the island, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Muinina people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this campus was built, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of colleagues, students, alumni, friends of the university and special guests. And I've noted in the audience Her Honour Justice Helen Wood, Supreme Court Judge, and also former Supreme Court Justice, the Honourable Shan Tennant, also Sarah Bolt, the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. And I'd also like to welcome back our former Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, Bridget Hayward, who has been such a great champion of gender equity issues at this university. Can I also just, as a side note, get you to check mobile phones and just to make sure that they're on silent, so we don't have an interruption once we get our speaker up. Tonight's lecture takes place on the eve of a day celebrated around the world as International Women's Day. International Women's Day provides a chance for us to honour and acknowledge those in the past who have fought and struggled to advance the position of women and girls in our community. And in reflecting how far we've come in recent generations and the gains made, the struggles for suffrage, for equal access to work and pay, for family and reproductive rights, we also have reason to reflect on the challenges still facing women. In recent years, our community has become increasingly aware of the epidemic of domestic and other violence directed towards our women, girls and families. Violence against women and girls is a serious problem, is entirely preventable, and we all have a role to play to end violence at home, in our community and around the world. As former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull had observed, disrespecting women does not always result in violence against women, but all violence against women begins with disrespect for women. Elevating women in the structures of our society, in our consideration and in our esteem are key to addressing not only the question of domestic violence, but the other barriers which prevent women from achieving their potential. This year's International Women's Day campaign theme is #BalanceForBetter, and it forms part of the title of tonight's address. As the campaign says, better the balance, better the world. Balance is not a women's issue, it's a business issue. The race is on for the gender-balanced boardroom, a gender-balanced government, gender-balanced media coverage, a gender balance of employees, more gender balance in wealth, gender-balanced sports coverage. Gender balance is essential for economies and communities to thrive. So that's all part of the campaign description. Our priority, of which we're reminded on International Women's Day, but must practice each and every day, is to cultivate a culture in which women are respected and valued. And in recent years, movements such as the Me Too movement have raised the profile of the lack of respect for women which pervades many parts of the society, especially many workplaces and industries, and has put a lens on issues such as sexual assault and harassment, sexual harassment. The community, and in particular those who by their own position or gender have not previously had to confront these issues personally, is now discussing the impact of overt and insidious sexual misconduct. Cultures of sexual harassment and discrimination cause harm to the individual women, harm to women as a group. We must also recognise they also hold back and harm the institutions and then more broadly the society in which they are tolerated or ignored. When women are able to lead, they are a powerful force for change, excellence and achievement. Gender equity is one of the key pillars of our emerging equity and diversity strategy, and we are very proud to have joined the SAGE Athena Swan pilot to address gender inequity issues, particularly in STEM, but also to ensure that the university embeds more generally organisational behaviours which promote and enable functional diversity. I mentioned Bridget Hayward, former Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, who had been a champion in this area. She had formerly chaired our University Equity Committee, and since her departure from the university, I will be taking that role on and hope to continue her good work and help progress our agenda on this front. As the only university in Tasmania, we take our responsibilities towards equity and diversity very seriously. The university is very much centred around people and place. We aspire to join with communities which recognise and value all those who participate in education and research, and ourselves commit to fostering and supporting good practice through our collaborations with local, regional and global partners. So we really want to help give leadership in this area. It's now my great pleasure to introduce someone who broke really the strongest of glass ceilings, becoming the first woman to lead Tasmania as Premier, the Honourable Lara Giddings, and our guest speaker for this evening. Lara Giddings was the 44th Premier of Tasmania from 2011 to 2014 and the first woman to hold the position. First elected to the Tasmanian House of Assembly in 1996 at the age of 23, she was also the youngest woman to be elected to an Australian Parliament, a seriously remarkable achievement. Lara represented the electorate of Lyons from 1996 to 98 and Franklin from 2002 until her retirement from politics in 2018. Her ministerial portfolios included economic development, arts, health and human services, Attorney General and Treasurer. Lara is a founding member of Emily's List, a national organisation that provides financial and mentoring support to progressive Labor women candidates, and of the International Women's Forum in Australia. She is a fierce advocate for progressive social policy, and as Premier led a move for Tasmania to go it alone on same-sex marriage before the reform was adopted federally. Lara has been amongst our strongest voices on work-life balance for women, and she had been very open in the past about her concerns that her career may prevent her from having a family. But of course we know in the meantime that last year she gave birth to daughter Natasha, and I know, because I listened to ABC Radio earlier this week, that it's been a big week for Lara in that she's actually returned to work this week. So for this lecture to sort of coincide with that, we're sort of especially grateful that she's made time for us. Last but not least, and really sort of thinking back to my former role as Law Faculty Dean, I want to express my delight that we can claim her as one of the university's alumna. She had studied an arts law degree, and just delighted that she's one of us as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in very warmly welcoming the Honourable Lara Giddings to talk to us on Balance for Better. Why is gender equality so hard to achieve? Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for that very warm welcome, and I am really stocked up here. I have a pharmacist as a partner, and I've got some Ricodine and I've got some Strepsils with me, as I've managed to catch my baby daughter's cold this week, so I'm hopeful I can get through this speech without a coughing attack, but pardon me if I do. But thank you so much for coming along this evening. I have to be honest and say that this has ended up being one of the hardest speeches I think I've ever written. And when David Bennewick from the university asked me late last year would I be prepared to be part of today's lecture, I jumped at it and thought, fantastic, this is great. I'd love to be able to talk more about gender equality. And then about 3 weeks ago, when I started to think about it and started to write some thoughts down, I thought, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for? This is so difficult, and it's so subjective, and it's so personal, and your experiences at times when you put them down on paper come across as so trite. So I have to say to you that it has been a very tough ask to present this to you this evening, but I'm really pleased to do so. And I'm really looking forward to some question and answers at the end, where I might be able to tackle a little bit more of the original question, which is, why is gender equality so hard to achieve? So please do think about what you might like to ask me at the end of my presentation as well. I also acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we gather today, and acknowledge elders past and present. This year's theme for International Women's Day is Balance for Better, an important reminder that we have yet to achieve gender equality in our parliaments, our workplaces, on boards, and in our homes. Women are still carrying the majority of the load of caring, of cooking and cleaning. Women are still paid less than men for their work. Women are still underrepresented on boards. Women are still underrepresented in our parliaments, particularly within the Conservative parties of the National and Liberal parties. So what is going on? How much is due to unconscious bias? How much is due to institutional bias? How much is due to men and how much is due to women? In fact, how much is due to women not supporting women? And how much is due to the nature versus nurture aspect to gender roles? And what sacrifices need to be made to achieve gender equality? Well, I don't have all the answers to those questions. That's a part when I started to think about this speech that started to overwhelm me. And then I thought to myself, well, actually, there are far better academic minds out there who have hypothesised, they've researched, and they have reached conclusions that would give far more considered and evidence-based answers to those questions. But I am going to try to give you some insight tonight as to what role gender, positive and negative, has played in my life, how I became Tasmania's first female Premier and now a mother at 46 years of age. I'll also look at some of those wider issues around gender and politics, and it certainly is a very hot topic, no matter where you turn at the moment, with the resignation of a number of men and women from the Australian Parliament for reasons that stem from the length of time that they've been there. Christopher Pyne comes to mind in regards to that, to a desire to be with their families, and I'll mention a few of those members in my presentation, to dissatisfaction and claims of bullying because of gender, which we've heard from Julia Banks. But I begin with my story. I grew up in a family where my father was well and truly outnumbered by my mother, my sister, myself, our cat, and our dogs. Not a male in sight. In fact, he took a shine to our neighbour's next door boxer dog, Hamish, not for his good looks, but I think purely because he was a male. And you see in this photo, there's a bit of rough and tumble going on with Hamish there. But my father is proud of his two daughters, and he's always supported us in pursuing our dreams. Here he is with me on the campaign trail back in 1995. And he's still my biggest fan and keeper of the Lara Giddings scrapbooks, of which there were well in excess of 50. But my first encounter with gender bias came from my father. Unconsciously for him, but very real to me. It came in the form of a young boy by the name of Scott Bowler, and I'll never forget his name. Scott was invited over to our house to spend time with my dad on the back porch doing activities that involved hammers, nails and paintbrushes. My role was to watch on from the sidelines and every now and again make them an iced coffee. Oh, how I so wanted to get in there and to hit a nail on the head and to swipe that paintbrush from side to side. After much complaining to my dad about the unfairness of the situation, he relented one afternoon and let me help paint one of his boxes. But I was really conscious of his nervousness as I made my brush strokes, and that was something that I had not detected when he was there on that porch with Scott. Now, during most of my childhood, we didn't have a television, but friends of ours did, and they would invite my father up to their house to watch war movies like The Bridge Over the River Kwai and The Great Escape, or cowboy movies like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. As a 9 or 10-year-old girl, these films were not considered exactly girl films, but I wanted to go with Dad. Why, you may you ask? Well, firstly, I loved movies and wanted to watch whatever I could. Secondly, I wanted to spend time with my dad. And thirdly, I didn't want to be told that because I was a girl, I couldn't enjoy these types of films and it was better for me to stay at home with my mum. While I loved my dolls, and I was very much a girly little girl in that respect, at no time did I ever consider I couldn't do anything I wanted to do because I was a girl. To the contrary, I read the girl detective Nancy Drew books and I enjoyed watching Charlie's Angels. With the innocent eyes of an 8-year-old, I loved the fact that Chris, Sabrina and Kelly always caught the bad guys, albeit in their bikinis and overseen by 2 men. Now, these subtle messages, however, no doubt lie somewhere in my subconscious mind. Having said that though, growing up in a family who had to listen to 15 minutes of ABC radio news every night, at 7 o'clock, over dinner, in silence, women in political leadership roles was a part of my norm. This was the end of the era of Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel, and in the middle of the era of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Unaware of the gender battles these women faced, hearing about them on the news meant it was natural to me that women could be leaders. Not necessarily good ones. After all, Mrs. Thatcher's economic rationalism did not sit very well in our socialist household. But then neither was Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser popular in our home. In fact, we had a Malcolm Fraser voodoo doll. And I don't remember gender being an issue at primary school either. Other than not wanting to get boy germs, it wasn't a matter of girls versus boys. It was simply who was better at maths or reading or science, and there was usually a boy and a girl competing to be top dog of my class. I wasn't one of them. What did strike me though at school was my natural interest in leadership. Considering I was a fairly shy person and one of those girls who had 1 or 2 really good friends, I was never in that sort of popular group in the school environment. In some respects, it's strange that I yearned to lead. The yearning came from my frustration when there was a lack of leadership. And I still remember vividly this particular day in grade 6 when group work was becoming more of the in thing and we were asked to sit around a table and undertake a task together. No one was saying anything, so I jumped in and took control. And I was quickly appointed the spokesperson by my team, a role that I was comfortable and secretly proud to take on. For my secondary years of schooling, my environment was very different. At the age of 12, I went to boarding school at the Methodist Ladies' College in Melbourne. Here, there were no boys to compete against. In fact, it was 24/7 girls, 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 with the occasional school social, which on the whole, I was too shy to attend. And while my social skills around boys took a dive, my confidence in myself grew in this environment, where girls were encouraged to take on any discipline they desired. I remember one of my friends wanting to become an astronaut. But it wasn't all beer and skittles though, and I suffered within the boarding house from bullying on and off through the last 3 years of my schooling. Bullying that involved isolating me from most of the other girls who acted as sheep around their leader. An example would be me walking into a common room in the boarding house and there'd be all this laughter that was occurring, but as soon as I walked in, it would be replaced with silence until I left again. However, it is said that out of adversity comes opportunity, and what this did for me was to build up my resilience. It set me up for a political career in the public spotlight where hurtful things are said about you, sometimes in the chamber, sometimes in the community, and more frequently now on social media, by people who don't know you and have never met you. I developed a hide as thick as a rhinoceros's. I learnt not to give up. After many tears on the phone to my mum, I was given the option to leave MLC and move to Hobart more than once. But I wanted to stay at that school that had educated my mum, educated my sister, and was educating me. I learnt not to take on board that nasty behaviour, but to let it be water off a duck's back. And I learnt that more often than not, a bully is a bully because they are emotionally in pain themselves and they want to take it out on someone else. So I learnt to feel sorry for them and not to let their problem drag me down. I learnt that it's better to stay true to yourself and not stoop to their level by retaliating. And as Michelle Obama puts it so well, when they go low, we go high. And if you're looking for revenge, this approach I find still works anyway, as I've found that people who want to be cruel and horrible to you, when you go back and be nice to them, it makes them actually feel worse than ever before, and you can walk away knowing that you've done nothing negative or said anything wrong. My final lesson was that I learnt to believe in myself and to run my own race in life rather than worry about what other people were achieving. To be able to do this, I think, is really quite liberating. Now, I've always loved politics. This passion was triggered in me from the age of 3, when the Whitlam government was dismissed by the Governor-General and my mother went to bed for a week with depression. But it was an inspirational politics teacher, Miss Phillips, and a magical trip to Canberra in grade 11 when I walked around the old Parliament House in the footsteps of all men, I might say, John Curtin, Ben Chifley and Gough Whitlam, and felt the excitement of seeing Paul Keating in question time in the new Parliament House. And this all led me to wanting to get involved in the Labor Party. It's seeing ministers like Ros Kelly and Susan Ryan in the Hawke government, and Premiers Carmen Lawrence of Western Australia and Joan Kerner of Victoria leading their governments meant that, again, I never thought of my gender as holding me back from a political career. To the contrary, in those early stages, it actually helped me being a woman. In 1990, I joined the Australian branch of the Labor Party, and the following year, as Marg said, I began my arts law degree here in the University of Tasmania. In fact, my very first lecture was in this lecture theatre. It was an introduction to law lecture. And during this period, the now Chancellor of the University, Michael Field, was Premier in a minority government held together with an accord with the Greens. The budget Michael inherited was in dire straits, and the government had to make tough decisions to prevent our state from becoming bankrupt. It's a little bit too familiar to me, I'm afraid. And after 2 years of hard work bringing the budget back together and dealing with the fraught issue of forestry, which took the government to the brink, Michael Field called an election and the Liberals won in a landslide. So the party I joined in 1990 was struggling. Labor was unpopular, the party was splintering over forestry, and idealistic young people were being drawn to the Greens. Hence, I was picked up by mentors like Duncan Kerr and encouraged to get involved in the party. Every door that opened to me, I entered. I never said no to an opportunity given to me. So before I knew what a state conference delegate did, I found myself elected to state conference. Before I knew what a national conference delegate did, I found myself elected to national conference, the youngest delegate ever at that time, and sitting at the same table as my hero, Prime Minister Paul Keating, and I might say the future Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. It was here that I first realised that being a woman was an issue in getting ahead in politics, for it was at this conference in 1994 that women like Joan Kerner, who had fought for equal representation in Parliament for many years, finally achieved a change to the party's rules that required women to be pre-selected in 35% of the winnable seats in parliaments across Australia. We finally had quotas in place. In 2002, this would lift to 40%, and now it is 50%. Community attitudes at this time were also changing, with more women being elected to all levels of government, particularly local government. And there was a similar wave of support for young people. So in 1995, when I was approached by Duncan Kerr to think about standing as a candidate for the rural seat of Lyons in the 1996 election, I said yes. Without his prompting, though, I would never have considered putting my hand up. But because someone of his stature and calibre and experience had come to me, I thought, well, I must be better than I'm giving myself credit for. And if he thinks I can do this, then I should give it a try. So I started my year-long campaign, door-knocking on 10,000 houses, letterboxing from the east coast to the west coast and the north coast to the south coast, because Lyons happened to touch every corner of this state at that time. And I was intrigued, door-knocking, just how many women that I met on the door who deferred to their husbands when it came to voting and talking about politics. It just felt so unnatural to me and the family that I'd grown up in, where politics was so much the topic of conversation with my mother and my father. But my last campaign in 2010, there were very few women who did not have their own opinion and were willing to share it with me, so times do change. Only once during my first campaign do I remember being treated differently from my male colleagues, and that was on a visit to an abattoir within my electorate. And I was told before we turned up, by Michael Field in fact, Lara, you don't have to go on this tour. Well, I'm not really that keen on seeing animals being slaughtered, but I was determined not to be left behind just because I was a woman. In my mind, if I wanted to be an elected representative, then I needed to be prepared to see anything that was relevant to the jobs and the livelihood of my constituents. Now, I was elected in 1996 at the age of 23, as Mark said, the youngest woman at that time to be elected to an Australian Parliament. And I have to say that I felt very much supported by both my male and my female colleagues. Other than my fellow Lyons colleague, the Labor member Michael Polly, who was notoriously competitive, and he took it upon himself one day to hide my electorate newsletters in an old filing cabinet in the hope that I'd never find them. Now, maybe if I was a young man, he would not have felt as threatened, but to be honest, I doubt it. I think it wouldn't have mattered who you were. But Michael went on to become my strongest supporter when I took on the role of Premier. Mind you, I was no longer in the electorate of Lyons, so no doubt that helped. As a young person and as a woman, I felt I had to prove myself, that's for sure, but I never felt that I couldn't achieve anything. It was just that I had to work a bit harder to show that I was a credible member and a credible shadow minister. The biggest disadvantage for me that I never overcame in my career was that of being single. And I used to watch my male colleagues turn up to community events with their wives, and they would split the room in half, or the fair in half, and one would do one side and the other would do the other side. So by the end of the evening, everybody had been effectively touched twice by the person with the name Llewellyn or the person with the name Polly, for instance. Whereas for me, I had to spend the whole night on my own trying to work the whole room and get across everybody once. And I still see that even with female members of Parliament who do have partners, that often you will see the female turn up to support their male elected member at country fairs and the like, but rarely do you see the male partners turning up to support the female elected members. So, and I see that with Julia Gillard, I see it with our current member as well, in our leader, Rebecca White, too. It seems to be a difference in that sense, that that level of support from partners is not necessarily there as a woman. I don't know exactly why. In 1998, despite more than doubling my primary vote, I did lose my seat in Lyons to Ken Bacon. I didn't actually feel that it was a rejection of me being young, or a rejection of me being a woman, or a rejection of me that I hadn't done a good enough job. It was, for me, two reasons. One, the Parliament was reduced from 35 seats to 25 seats, so there were fewer seats to win. And secondly, there was definitely some mistaken identity with people voting for Ken Bacon thinking they were voting for Jim Bacon. And I literally had people ring me up after the election saying, "I'm so sorry, I meant to vote for you, but I saw Mr Bacon's name. I thought we needed that to be him to be the Premier, so I gave him my number one." So because of that, I never lost heart in politics for the future. But post-election and unemployed, I hit the glass ceiling for the very first time. My male colleague, who had also lost his seat, was quickly set up with a well-paid advisor role within a ministerial office. And I had been promised a job too, until the Jobs for the Boys headline hit the Mercury newspaper, and then I was told, "Sorry Lara, we can't employ you after all. Too hot a story, can't go there." A couple of years later, I was employed in a ministerial office, in fact in the Premier's office, but on about half the salary of my male colleague. In 2002, I made my comeback, and 2 years later became a minister in the Lennon government when Jim Bacon had to resign with ill health. I had been Paul's parliamentary secretary, assisting him on small business and Antarctic affairs. Perhaps because he was a father of daughters, I never felt that gender was an issue with Paul. Instead, he put his confidence in me by giving me responsibilities far beyond what a normal parliamentary secretary would be given. So it was more than just representing him at public events. An example was that he asked me to look at the issue of Antarctic adventure in the small business sort of portfolio, which was losing about $10,000 a month for the government. And he said, "What should we do with it?" I looked into it, got advice from the department, went back to him and said, "There's nothing we can do with this business." So he said, "Well, you're the one who has to go down to Antarctic Adventure and tell the 5 permanent employees that they no longer have a job." Was he squibbing the hard job himself, or was he giving me a chance to be able to prove myself? I believe it was the latter, that he wanted to throw me in the deep end and make me prove myself that I could do this. And it was really tough having to face those 5 people and tell them they no longer had a job. But it was an experience that set me up to be able to make tough decisions in the future. Paul went on to appoint me as Economic Development Minister in 2004, and considering I was young, a woman, and had little experience in business, I felt I had to prove myself more than ever in this male-dominated environment. Confidence was the key, the make it or fake it till you make it philosophy. I made sure I read all of my briefs, and I tried to exude confidence by consciously walking with purpose into a room. My back straight, my chest open, my hand ready for a firm grip handshake, and a smile on my face as I had to make my presence be felt. Whereas Jim Bacon and Paul Lennon, with their natural height and stature, always were able to make their presence felt simply by just walking into a room. I couldn't do that. While I never felt I did not have the respect of the people I worked with, both within government and the private sector, I soon realised that the regular work environment was not the place where business was conducted. On a Monday morning, the Premier would come over to me and he would say, "Can you please contact this person? He has an idea that I think is worth pursuing." And I'd be left thinking, well, where did that come from? And why didn't they contact me as Economic Development Minister? I soon realised that these ideas were being raised in informal environments, mostly while watching the cricket or over a round of golf. I had hit the unconscious gender bias. An assumption had been made that I would not like sport. Now, I was never going to take up golf, but I did enjoy cricket. So I went to the chairman of Cricket Tasmania, who also happened to be the chairman of the Economic Development Board, the Tasmanian Development Board, Dennis Rogers, and I asked him if I could go to the chairman's room to watch the next cricket match. And he was delighted. It hadn't even occurred to him that there was an issue. And so he immediately ensured that I was invited to all future matches. And what I found is exactly what I suspected. This was where all the gems of ideas were being floated, just in a casual conversation, like, "G'day Paul, how's it going? I've got an idea for you, mate, that you might like." And then it'd be, "Oh, sounds good. Why don't I get Lara to follow that up for you on Monday? I reckon we could do something to help you out there." Now, no one objected to me being there in the chairman's room. It just had never occurred to them that I might have wanted to have been there. From then on, I made sure that I got invitations to all those sporting networking opportunities, such as at the tennis, the football, the soccer, the V8 supercars, basketball, you name it, I went to it. And there was only on one occasion where a man really had a problem with me being a woman, and that actually occurred in Japan, not here in Australia. In that instance, a local prefecture minister and I were to sign a document, a ceremonial document, as part of the sale of Incat ferries to that region. And when he walked into the room and he saw that it was a woman that he was going to have to work with, he immediately turned around and went out again. And it took some time for them to convince this man to come back in. But he did in the end, and we signed the document and all the celebrations took place. But I'd never encountered that before, and I've never encountered that again since. Following the 2006 election, I was appointed Minister for Health and Human Services, and I immediately felt relaxed. So that's my own bias in that sense around gender and being in an area that was considered to be more female friendly. So perhaps that was my own unconscious bias. In 2008, Paul Lennon stepped down as Premier and I became Deputy to David Bartlett. The leadership transition was smooth and David's wish was for me to be his deputy, and that was accepted by my parliamentary caucus without any blood being spilt on the floor. So why did he want me as deputy? Well, some of it was because we got along well together. We were both part of the new generation of leaders and we respected each other. But I know it was also because he wanted a woman beside him, that would help differentiate the Bartlett government from the previous Lennon and Bacon government. So in that sense, it was another instance where it actually helped me to be a woman to take on that leadership role. David's time as Premier, though, was not easy. He had to deal with investigations into the former police commissioner and his deputy. He had a parliamentary colleague attempt suicide. The global financial crisis hit. The forest industry was hurting. And after the 2010 election, we were in a minority government. He also had 2 young children who missed their dad. These and other pressures took their toll, and by the beginning of 2011, he resigned. I could see that this was building up towards the end of 2010 and that there was some likelihood that I would have an opportunity to become Premier. David was encouraging me to take on the role, and my closest advisors, trusted friends were also encouraging me to take on the role. And this is where Michael Polly came back into the picture, because he assured me that I had the numbers in the caucus and that there would be no challenge. While I was nervous and questioned whether I could do it, it was their confidence in me that once again made me think, well, if other people think I can do it, then I must be able to. And I went ahead with it. So I became Tasmania's first female Premier. In this role, I was more conscious of gender issues, some subtle and some not so subtle. Ghowever, I must say I never experienced that nasty, misogynistic speech that Julia Gillard faced so often. Now, who can forget her brilliant speech that she made in Parliament that was aimed at opposition leader and instigator of much of that nastiness of Tony Abbott's? Interestingly, at the time she made that speech about misogyny, the media said she'd made the wrong call, that she should not have played the gender card. Well, how wrong they were, because many people in the community welcomed her calling out the gender bias, and the video of her speech just took off on social media. However, there were others in the community who Tony Abbott was pandering to. He was playing to them. They were the people who would still not accept a woman as a Prime Minister. And I recall after she lost the election in 2013 that I had people say to me, well, she was a disaster, we'll never have a woman Prime Minister again. And I was really quick to point out to them that even if she had been, that there were plenty of men in history far worse, and we'd never once said that we could never have a male leader again. So how ridiculous was it that they were saying exactly that? But what about me? How did my gender affect my time as Premier? Well, you would have thought that a major newspaper interviewing a Premier after their first year in office, dealing with the ramifications of a global financial crisis, a budget crisis, a forestry crisis and a slowing economy, that maybe the article might have touched on these issues. No. A question on relationships and children, among many questions, led to an entire article on whether I might become a pregnant Premier one day. Now, I found being a woman made it harder also to network with men one-on-one over lunch or dinner that had occurred with Jim, Paul or David before me, for fear that if I was seen having a one-on-one lunch with a man, that unfair rumours would emerge. Now, you might think I'm being a little bit paranoid here, but throughout my career there had been rumours of me having affairs. Rumours that included an affair with Paul Lennon. I assume just because I was his parliamentary secretary. And then there were rumours that were rife when I was Premier that Brian Greene and I were having an affair. And then there were rumours that I was a lesbian, and I must have been because I was single and I had no children. In truth, my life was pretty boring. I was really yet to meet my soulmate, and I was too busy anyway for relationships, and instead I found myself in bed with a pile of paperwork every night. I don't know if any of you have seen the series Borgen, but the Danish Prime Minister in the series Borgen was seen in bed with paperwork, and I said, that's me, that was my life. Now, interestingly, after the election, I noticed a difference in how men interacted. This is after the 2014 election. I was interested to see how men reacted to Will Hodgman as Premier. I recall that one night I was in the parliamentary dining room and Will sat down with the same men, the same businessmen that I had sat down with time after time over dinner. And I just watched their body language with Will. They were relaxed, they were leaning back, they were laughing and joking, and I thought they never once did that with me, no matter how much I tried to make them feel comfortable. It was always a good night and a polite night, and we'd have interesting discussion, but there was always that element of formality to the evening which disappeared with Will Hodgman like that. And I thought, is it because business people are just traditionally conservative and they're more at home with liberals? Or is it because I was a woman? And then I thought about that more and I thought, I'm sure it's because I was a woman. They didn't quite know how to react to me, how to just have a social evening and interact and share information in the same way that they did with Paul Lennon or they did with Jim Bacon, or in this instance that they did now with Will Hodgman. As Premier, I also found a difference in the way my colleagues, male and female, behaved with me in Cabinet compared to the men before me. The men commanded respect from the minute they sat down. I did not. Instead, I had to exert my authority by sitting upright. Body language, I think, is really important in these ways. So I'd have to sit upright at the table and I would then have to raise my voice in order to be able to take control of the meeting. It was worse within the Parliamentary Labor Party meetings, where I felt often challenged at every turn and got to a point where I dreaded having to face those meetings. This was exacerbated by an ongoing leadership challenge that over my 3 years as leader was never brought to the surface, but instead simmered underneath within a small cabal of men. I had not seen this with any of my male leaders. While I'm sure some of it was to do with my gender, I also ask, was some of it just me? You start to question yourself. And was it my leadership style that was a problem? Or was it the pressures of a minority Labor Green government going through tough economic and budget times that was causing the unrest? No doubt it had a bit to do with everything. I also endured gender bias in the Parliament. The behaviour of the opposition was at times appalling. I had never seen a Premier treated with such disrespect as I frequently was. Almost every time I got up to speak about an issue as Premier, the Liberals would turn their backs towards me and start to talk to each other. Not loudly, but enough to show me that they were disinterested in anything that I had to say. They were trying their best to get under my skin. They were trying to put me off my game. I called them out on it many times, but with little impact, although I must say the Liberal women did not partake in these petty games in the same way as the men. And once I got into opposition, and in fact once I left, I actually received quite a few compliments from those same Liberal men who behaved so badly. So I think perhaps they really were threatened by me as well. Now, I don't like to make comparisons with Margaret Thatcher, but I do like some of her quotes. They're quite apt, because men and women are different. Both genders have strengths and weaknesses, and to me highlight why the best cabinet is the one with a balance of both. For instance, I observed over many years women only speaking at the table if they had something new to say, whereas men were quite happy to repeat each other's points over and over and over again, just to ensure that they were part of the conversation. I have also witnessed the phenomena of a woman's idea not gaining traction until repeated by a man. Both men and women worked hard as ministers to get across their portfolios. However, what I also observed was that men kept largely to the big picture and women got into the detail. Perhaps that's why men always seem to have more time for networking over coffee or lunch or dinner, because I used to often wonder how they ever found that time. However, too much big picture and the detail can catch you out. Too much detail and you get so bogged down in the minutiae that you can miss what is critical to work through an issue efficiently, especially when you've got deadlines of the media, for instance, waiting for you. I have seen women miss political opportunities because they knew too much detail and it clouded their ability to speak out on an issue. With this awareness, I tried to keep a balance between these two approaches, enough detail to prove that I knew what I was talking about and enough big picture to try to keep people with me. Another difference I observed was when women made up their mind to support a certain approach, they would stick to it, no matter what the pressure was to change. I saw this with Paula Reet and Essential Learnings. I saw it in myself with Tasmania Health Plan, and I saw it in Judy Jackson with the groundbreaking Family Violence Act and also the Significant Relationships Bill. I personally found it hard to shift once I had decided on a path. If I felt what I was doing was right, I wanted to follow through, and I found it really hard to compromise and to shift off that pathway. An example was my decision over road accident rescue responsibilities. I took the job of using the jaws of life to free people from car wreckages off ambulance officers and gave it to fire officers, because both of them attend that scene. And all the advice that had been given to me and to previous governments many times was that ambulance officers should be there to treat the patient. They were not there to be operating machinery. And you had fire officers who had the time to train and often the strength, because they also have the time to go to the gym, to be able to use the jaws of life and do something practical at the scene of a car accident. Now, this was the same approach that was taken in rural settings in Tasmania and in rural settings and urban settings across Australia. But the backlash that I got from the ambulance officers was substantial. There were TV ads that were broadcast against me, a life recognition award was virtually thrown back at me in protest, and heated regional meetings were held, which I attended, that were held specifically to try to change my mind. I never did. Would I do it differently if I was given the chance again? Well, the answer is very firmly no. I knew then it was the right reform, and it remains the right reform today. I was fortunate that Fran Bladel gave me some advice early in my career that was that if you will know that you've made the right decision if you can wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror without being disappointed. That's not to say that men didn't take on controversial issues either. I mean, they did. There were issues around forestry and marine farming, to name a couple. But what I would see with their approach, or my perception at least, was that they were far more willing to try to reach a compromise outcome to appease all parties. Now, I want to make it clear, I never chose career over family. I never made a decision to not have my own children. In fact, I was one of those romantic young girls who dreamed of getting married and having children alongside a career. And throughout my time as an elected member, I longed to meet my soulmate and start a family, but I found it difficult to find that right man. Of those men who did have the confidence to approach me, most of them were either drunk at a pub, and they just wanted me to be another notch on their belt, or there were the occasional older, I must say, sleazy, married man who thought that he was God's gift to women. And I shouldn't also forget that I did have the occasional woman too, who made it clear that they were interested in getting to know me a bit better. Now, one of those, I must say, I quite like this story, was at the Henry Jones building. My old school, MLC, held an alumni night, and all of us, including my protection officer, thought, well, Lara will be fine. It's a private function, alumni night, and the MLC girls, or women I should say, and so she'll be fine. Well, little did they know that one of those alumni was a woman who was angry that I had closed the Ooze Hospital years before. And she got me up against a wall with her fist to my face as she said to me, I don't know whether I should thump you or kiss you. Well, thankfully she didn't either. But while I had faced angry crowds and I'd had firecrackers thrown at my feet and I'd had a stalker who declared his love for me through letters and had to have upped up private police protection as a result of that, this was the only time that I actually really felt physically threatened. And getting back to children, I hated it when people would say to me, oh, you don't understand, you don't have kids. Some people in the community even went as far as to say to me that I shouldn't be in Parliament as I had no children and I couldn't possibly understand the needs of families. Well, while I was prepared to have children and still pursue my career, as Jacinda Ardern and Benazir Bhutto had shown was possible, I have to say now I was very glad that that didn't happen to me. I've not had to struggle at work with mummy's brain from hormones or lack of sleep. I've not had to leave my baby every day to go to work and not have the time to just sit on the couch and hold her in my arms for hours and hours on end. It's hard enough going back to a part-time job now that she is a 1-year-old. And yes, there have been tears. The first 2 days were horrific, as many of you may well understand. And I honestly don't know how Jacinda Ardern has been able to do it. She is fortunate to have a supportive partner who has been prepared to take on the role of full-time parent, making it possible for her to feed Neve every 3 hours between meetings or attend, as they are here, the United Nations with her baby beside her. Now, I mentioned this morning on radio, and Rick Goddard picked me up very quickly and said, you used the word lucky about the fact that she has a partner who would do this. And I said, well, yes. And I still think, in a sense, it should not be that way. It should be equal between males and females. But the reality that we live in right now is it's not that equal. But it is shifting that way. But it is rare that you do have men who are prepared. In fact, the figures of men taking parental leave is still relatively low. Most go back into the workforce. It seems to work for them, but giving up time with your baby is a sacrifice that obviously she is willing to make. And from the perspective of someone in left politics, I'm personally very pleased that she is willing to make that sacrifice too, because she is one of those refreshing young world leaders who is proving that you can be humane and kind around refugees, that you can be a believer in climate change and the need for action, and you can still be patriotic and protective of your nation and its values. In terms of supporting women and children in Parliament, it's disgraceful that it took until 2008 for space for a childcare facility to be created in the federal Parliament. But as more women have been elected, changes have occurred in many of our parliaments to make it easier to support nursing mothers, including being able to breastfeed now on the floor of Parliament. In the Tasmanian House of Assembly, those rule changes only occurred in 2016 with the arrival of Rebecca White's baby girl, Mia. Paula Reid before her had no such support in the early 2000s when she had her 2 children. Interestingly, as women get more involved in politics, men are also choosing to leave Parliament to be more hands-on parents. Alongside Kate Ellis and Kelly O'Dwyer, who've chosen not to recontest their seats in order to spend more time with their young families, Labor's Tim Hammond recently announced his retirement from federal politics to spend more time with his family, as did government frontbencher Michael Kiernan, who no longer wanted to be an absent dad. Unfortunately for me, by the time I did meet my soulmate, I had entered perimenopause and was unable to have my own genetic child. Now, while I can't have a child that is genetically my own, I am so grateful for the gift of an egg, which has enabled me to have my baby with Ian. She is a lucky little girl to have 4 beautiful older siblings, and I am the luckiest mother in the world to have her. When given the opportunity now, though, I do encourage young men and women to not delay parenthood for too long in order to have successful careers, or use it as an excuse not to settle down with one partner too soon. For while technology is allowing for the freezing of eggs, it's not foolproof. And the reality is women's bodies are ready to procreate from their teens through their 20s and start to decline in their 30s. Too many women are finding it harder than they expected to fall pregnant and are having to try fertility treatments to help. For women under 35 years, the success rate is 40% chance of falling pregnant. For women over 42, that drops down to 4%. Now, I'm going to finish on this vexed issue of quotas. A quota is necessary, absolutely, if you are to reach gender balance in our lifetime and change a culture that has discriminated against women. And just ask Julie Bishop, who arguably should be Prime Minister, except for the boys cutting her out. Gender bias is very much alive and well in the federal Liberal Party. The merit argument just doesn't wash, or else we wouldn't have a problem. It would be roughly 50-50. The reality is that men don't give up power that easily. And within the Labor Party, women had to fight hard to get quotas into the rules. These rule changes have seen the emergence of some really great women, all of them being meritorious. Just see these graphs to see the impacts of quotas. Women make up 46.3% of Labor seats across the Parliament, federally. The Liberals, 22.9%, and the Nationals, less than 10%, with having just 2 women out of 21 MPs. And the Greens are 50-50. The Tasmanian Parliament has reached gender equality in terms of representation, making leaps and bounds over the past 8 years. In 2010, women made up 24% of the House of Assembly. This increased to 36% in 2014, and in 2018, we became the first Australian Parliament to have more than 50% women, with the figure being 52% now. Just as in federal Parliament, it is Labor's quotas that have helped lead the way, and also the community voting for women under the Hare-Clark system. Indeed, Labor's House of Assembly caucus is currently made up of 70% women. We may even need male affirmative action in order to achieve gender balance. The Liberals lag at 38%, and the Greens, with their 2 members, have 100% female representation. Now, has having more women changed Parliament? Well, yes, it has. In my experience, there are less personal put-downs and attacks. You only have to talk to Judy Jackson and Fran Bladel to hear just how awful it was for them in the 1980s, when they were basically told that they shouldn't even be there in Parliament, that it was not a place for women. But personal attacks are not absent, and women are sometimes the ones at fault. The government has certainly tried to paint Rebecca White prior to the last election as young and inexperienced, but not overtly for being a woman. I don't think the community in this day and age would look upon them very well if they did. As for the tone of Parliament, it's not changed that much from when I was first elected. There is still much interjecting in question time, for example. But then that's also because women too love a good debate. I personally enjoyed speaking most when I could speak with passion and conviction, and sometimes that meant raising my voice. In fact, probably not sometimes, more often than not. But I do think there is some differences there. Women do their research more around issues that are being debated. They go into the detail. They tend to therefore become better prepared to debates than the men, who look at the big picture. I've never heard, for instance, a woman revert or pick up a recipe to read into Hansard merely for the point of filibustering. I've heard them filibuster, but not to that extent of disrespect to the Parliament. But I have seen it in action from a man. What has changed is the behaviour, though, of members outside of the chamber. There used to be many more late nights and drinking, whereas now the dining room's deserted by 9 o'clock at night at the latest on sitting nights as people go home to their families as quickly as possible. Now, I can see good and bad in both. What we've gained is more family time and fewer hangovers. But what we've lost is the sharing of stories, of the learning that comes from listening to those who've been around the traps. It's just not the same over a cup of coffee. And at the end of my career, I missed the past. I missed those long nights. I missed the camaraderie that came over a glass of wine or two. The job was becoming much more like a 9-to-5 job. But then at that point, I was still single and without children. Put me in there now, and I would want to be home with my daughter too. No one should ever be held back because of their gender. It's important that we all have equal opportunity to participate in whatever field of endeavour captures our imaginations. Women have come a long way in their fight for gender balance and equality, but we're not there yet. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Well, I think that applause speaks for itself, and thank you, Lara, for a most inspiring and engaging presentation. Now, we have perhaps 10 minutes for questions. I should mention, if you didn't notice it earlier, that this session is being live streamed, so if people are concerned about that, then I suggest you don't ask a question, otherwise it will be recorded. There will be some roving microphones going around, and let's just go back to that point that Lara sort of invited questions relating to the topic, but of course about anything else that she's covered. So let me see where we have hands going up. Okay, first question here, and then up the back, and then I'll keep looking out for... So if we could get a microphone just here, and if you don't mind just waiting till the microphone comes so we can capture your question. And congratulations, Lara, also on not needing your pharmaceutical backup. Great. So just behind you. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
I attended the engineering careers fair today at the university on behalf of an employer and as an engineer promoting engineering, and the overwhelming feedback was it's getting harder and harder to recruit females to STEM, and we're actually seeing a decline in females taking up engineering. How do you see us attacking that issue when our baby girls, who from the beginning are, we're marketed to be prim and proper, from the slogans on their t-shirts to the colours of the clothes that are promoted, the pink aisle for toys, the blue aisle for girls and the blue aisle for boys. I guess it's engendered from a very young age and it's getting more and more so. How do you see that, us addressing that issue?
Well, in my family, I was very lucky to get a gift when Natasha was born. That's actually a book that is very gender neutral, and it talks about women, girls, becoming engineers. So we'll be doing our bit to try to help promote that profession for our daughter. But I think too that there are, for me personally, I really think there are differences between males and females too. And that while we can talk about that we have gender toys and gender colours for children, pink and blue and the like, that there's also some differences. And I think some studies have shown that when they've put boys and girls together, that the boys have gone naturally off to the cars and the girls have gone off to the dolls. But everything's a spectrum. And there will be some girls that are really girly girls, and it doesn't matter how much you read them a book about engineering, they're never going to be engineers. And there'll be some girls who are far more inclined towards mathematics and science and would see engineering as a future. There'll be some girls in between who might need convincing that engineering isn't just about numbers, that it impacts on people. Because I think that girls are very community minded, that we do care a lot about people and we want to know what we're doing is going to help people. Whereas I see with men that they're far more focused, structured people who sit comfortably with science and maths and the like and problem solving. They don't want the emotional so much, they just want to solve a problem. And again, it's a spectrum of men. My partner is on the spectrum towards being more feminine in the way he approaches issues. But my father is less so. And other men in my life are even less so again. So I think it's just accepting that we're all different, we can all be on that spectrum, and saying to our young girls, you can do anything you want. And if they are interested in engineering, if they are interested in building and bridges and cars and trains, promote that. And that's our role as parents in this day and age, is to harness the dream of your child, whatever that dream might be. And not to judge, because what is also I find hard, and part of the reason why I found this a difficult topic is I thought, I'm going to be judged on whatever I say here. I'm going to potentially upset somebody with my opinion because of my own unconscious bias that will exist in part of what I say too.
Thank you. The next question.
First, I'd like to say I thought it was a terrific presentation and I really enjoyed it. But my comment actually is about quotas and you touched on that and showed very clearly how effective quotas have been, at least in the political sphere. And I would be interested in your opinion about whether quotas in general can be regarded as a good thing, or should we be more discerning and decide that there are some realms where quotas aren't appropriate? And it's partly a loaded question because what I'm seeing in the academic world is that quotas are being favoured, if you like, and to me that doesn't necessarily seem to be an appropriate environment in which to have quotas, because surely in the academic world what we're after is excellence, and you want the best person for the job, regardless of their gender. And so my request is that you would comment on that from your vast experience in dealing with quotas.
Well, might I say first that one of the things I've learnt through my political career is there's very little in life that's black and white, that there's often shades of grey on everything. And you could give an example specifically of an area where there's not very many women, and therefore quotas might mean that it's difficult to actually even get women to take on those roles. But generally speaking, I actually think that when we're talking about excellence, what is even the definition of excellence? And who's made that definition? Because it's very easy to create a definition that fits the existing structures as well. And excellence can mean a lot of other things too. It's not just whether you can count or spell well in that sense. It's also about what you bring to the table. And I think we have to value what women bring to the table. And it has been shown with business boards, for instance, that where they do have gender balance, that the businesses perform much better. So if you're talking about leadership at the university level, for instance, what is the definition of excellence even there with academia? And should we cut women out if there aren't enough women at that higher level that would fall under that traditional definition of excellence? Does that mean that their voice shouldn't be heard? Because I actually think it's really critical that the female voice is heard in all arenas. So quotas are a very blunt instrument, that's for sure, and they have worked well in politics. And in Germany, for instance, Angela Merkel has forced quotas also on business, because there's always been that talk there too, oh well, you'd get there on merit. But the reality is women are not getting there onto boards via merit alone, and yet they can contribute so much more. So I hope I've answered that to a degree in that respect, that I think it's not clear-cut, it's not easy, and it is a blunt instrument. But if you're not getting women up, and what I'm conscious of is that there is still the glass ceiling for women. If you go down to the Royal Hobart Hospital, for instance, look at how many women are at the leadership level of those medical directors. There's not very many at all. And I have spoken to women who've said they've wanted to take on some of those roles and they miss out to men, and these are very highly competent women. So there is a glass ceiling that we need to crack, and perhaps quotas is the only way we can really do it, at least in our lifetime.
I saw a hand go up. I think we've got time for one last question before we wrap things up.
Hi, thank you. This kind of links into what you're just talking about, and you mentioned this within your personal experience as well. So there's a real problem with women in STEM not progressing from the level C, which is particularly equivalent to middle management. So they're comfortable in A, B, and then don't really go further. And really to do that, you have to put yourself forward and you have to enter into that promotion stream, which you yourself have said you got that tap on the shoulder from a male colleague. So how do we actually start encouraging women to put themselves forward and to essentially be their own advocate?
The biggest thing I think is that we have to help build confidence in women, because we're detail people, we very quickly go, that just seems too big and too daunting for us to take on. And I'm living that right now as a new CEO of the AMA. Now, the first 2 days were absolute hell, and I went home and thought, what have I allowed myself to get into here? I'm so far out of my comfort zone, it's incredible. So, but I'm having to tell myself that actually give yourself time and space to learn those skills. And you might not understand how Excel works immediately right now, but you don't have to.
Whereas as a woman, you're like, but I need to know everything. I need to be perfect right now. Men don't see life like that. You know, they glide so much more easily. They've got an inner confidence that says, I'll be right. It'll all sort itself out. So that's what I try to be conscious of in that respect, that not to get bogged down in the detail, which is a natural place for women to go, but to keep to the bigger picture. So if you know there are women around you who are competent and you want to see them step up, don't let the first no mean that you walk away from that woman. She just needs a bit more assistance, a bit more confidence building, and to be told she can be a manager, she can be a director, she can be a secretary of a department. We do need women in these roles. But we also have to be honest that women face career challenges with family balance as well. And that was my aspect I never had to face because I never had children. I didn't have a partner through my highly successful career. That came at a sacrifice for me in that respect. But women are having to make these choices as well. And it's a choice that men will slowly take on more of. But I don't know, this is the hard area for me. Emotionally, even if Ian had said to me, Lara, you go back to work 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks after Natasha was born, and I will look after Natasha, which he would have done, there is absolutely no way I would have let him do it. That was my baby. I had carried that baby for 9 months, and now she was a part of me, and I'm still breastfeeding now, and he is such a beautiful man. He brings her in every day at lunchtime so I can maintain that relationship with my baby as we both go on the journey of weaning together. But there's no way I wanted to work. I resented on Monday having to go back to work. So we've got to accept too that these things are choices that we all make, and we need to respect people's choice to go back to work, respect people's choice not to go, their husbands to support them, their partners to support them, whatever it may be. Let's just make sure we've all got equal opportunity to do what we want to do. That's the critical thing.
Well, in wrapping things up, as you know, we've been here to celebrate International Women's Day, and this address is part of a global conversation about the advancement of women and a celebration of what is possible when women's contributions are valued. And my reflections on Lara's address, your ability to capture a crowd, you've certainly shared very generously of yourself and beautiful photos from the past. It's been a very personal account, and one with lots of life lessons and key messages like out of adversity comes opportunity, and really bearing your soul in many respects on these issues, but also your capacity to present delightfully with humour and absolute authenticity. Everything I would have expected of you, Lara. But I think importantly, explaining your leadership journey, starting from that early time at boarding school, and also some key aspects of good life advice, that you've entered every door that had been sort of presented, taking up opportunities, having no regrets, and this idea of being confident and drawing on the confidence of others to get confidence as well. So I'm sure all of us have benefited from your wise counsel and the broad coverage of what you've shared with us tonight. So it's my privilege on the behalf of all here to offer a vote of thanks for all you have done for women, particularly in Tasmania, and of course especially tonight, delivering tonight's International Women's Day address. So please join with me in thanking Lara, and I want to extend my thanks to you, of course, also as the audience to make this evening possible, and encourage you to continue to come to forums such as this. So please join with me giving hearty thanks and appreciation to Lara for a wonderful address. So with that, good night everyone, and go well. Thank you.